This is the Team Performance Podcast, where we explore issues at the heart of leadership, team development and organisational culture. I'm your host, Mark Gilroy, and in this series, we're delving into issues around team dynamics, team development and, of course, team performance. Let's welcome today's guest. Welcome to the latest in our series of interviews, and today I'm joined by Dom Weldon from Albany Peak. Now, Dom started life as a Royal Marines commando before moving into sales and relationship management, as well as product strategy, and launched Albany Peak back in 2021. And through Albany Peak, he's worked with senior leadership teams across a variety of sectors, including finance, education, and FMCG. Welcome to the show, Dom.
Hi, Mark. Good afternoon. Great to be here. I've listened to a few episodes, so looking forward to the conversation.
Superb. Me too. And there are so many things that we could talk about in this episode, but I wanted to kick off with a question we ask most people in this particular series, which is all about teams. And that is, what is the most memorable team that you have encountered?
Yeah, so I've mulled over this question, given I've heard it on previous episodes. And the mind all wanders for me to high-performing teams, which is a focus area of mine at the moment, and arguably been a parallel for my career over the last sort of 20 years or so. So high-performing teams, I think it's worth giving Dom's definition of what I mean by that. It's a phrase that's used a lot, isn't it? So for me, we're talking about a team that is a team in the sense that it has collective goals, the actions interact or impact on one another in the team, and they ultimately win or lose together. And I think sometimes in certain environments, teams are called that, or teams are called a team because they report to the same person, or it makes sense geographically on an org chart, but actually they have individual goals, they're incentivized and rewarded as individuals, and often their work doesn't really impact each other. So for me, high performance teams has to be a team in the first kind of definition I gave. And then for me, high performance isn't necessarily an absolute level of performance. For me, it's a two-step process. The team have an awareness that their collaboration determines their output, and then they make a conscious commitment to improve that collaboration, their ways of working going forward. Now, that might sound kind of obvious or trite, but again, I think a lot of teams work together and actually they don't really focus on how they collaborate, how they interact, how they work. And if they do, it's not necessarily a conscious or continuous focus of theirs. And I think teams that do this ultimately, perform above the average and reach that higher level. So with that definition in mind, the two teams that kind of came to mind when I thought about this, and I would also caveat what I'm going to say here, that I've been in plenty of low performing teams, so my history is not one of roses and nice music. But I think the two teams that stick out to me first was the first when I was at school, actually, my rowing crew. So I was lucky enough to go to a really good rowing school, one of the top in the country. At age 17, I found myself in the second eight, and we made a commitment or a goal at the start of that season that we were going to win the school's Head of the River race and the National Schools Regatta, which are the two main events in the school calendar. And we did that. I think, the facilities, the coaches, the environment, the behaviours were all lost on me at the time. But that was definitely my first exposure to a high-performing environment. I then built on that a few years later and stepped up and joined the Royal Marines and had the privilege of, over a 9-year career, leading some incredible teams and people across a range of environments and challenges. And I guess the two teams that stick out to me in that space were the one I went to Afghanistan with, and then the team that I took young recruits through commando training with. So those are the teams that kind of stick out in my mind. And I then obviously asked myself, well, why? I think for me, they have a few things. The first was a real strong sense of social identity, a real strong sense of social glue, a sense of meaning and purpose behind what we were doing, a sense of belonging, a sense of edge. They had really effective team ways of working, collaborative ways of working. There was strong leadership at all levels, and not necessarily kind of the person in charge, as it were, but leadership behaviours, in sense of everyone had ownership and accountability and saw themselves as agents of change for the team. There was real strong clarity around where we were going and how we were going to get there, and what our part of that piece was. And finally, I'd say they're all effective at executing and getting stuff done and adaptable to a changing situation. So those are my thoughts on that. I'll pause there because I might have said a few things that open some avenues of discussion.
Oh my goodness, yeah, plenty of avenues there. I almost don't know where to start, actually. Let's go with collaboration determine output? Because that really, you said that was something that was relatively self-explanatory, but I don't think it is for a lot of teams. I think a lot of teams would think that other things determine their output, and in some cases they are relatively challenging aspects that determine output. I'm thinking about your background in sales. You must have come across teams where competition determines their output, and it's literally kind of people fighting to the top to be the top performing salesperson of the month and so on, and the team aspect gets a little bit forgotten. So could you speak a bit more about that, about what effective collaboration looks like, and how you get a team to view themselves as that being the thing that determines their output?
Yeah, so I think going back a step, and I alluded to it first, the team has to both view themselves as a team and be a team. So for me, that's kind of three things. They have to have collective goals. There's no point trying to loop a team together if they've all got separate goals. So they have to have collective goals. Their actions have to have a significant impact and effect on one another by the nature of the work that they're doing. And ultimately, they need to be incentivized and rewarded such that they win or they lose together. Now, if you have those things in place, then that team is incentivized to work together. If you don't have those things, you're a group of individuals who have individual goals. Your actions don't really necessarily affect each other, and you incentivize and reward it individually. And a lot of teams, which we call teams in the workplace, are often a hybrid of the two, or sometimes even more in the group space. So there is little to no purpose in collaborating when you're a group. And actually you're kind of detracting from, what it is that you're trying to get after, and it can cause frustrations. They're obviously helpful for hybrids to collaborate in certain spaces. But for teams, collaboration is absolutely necessary, because if you win or lose together and you've got a collective goal to succeed, then your interacting, working with each other is critical. That's the piece that teams, they kind of get. Yeah, we work together, we join a call on a Monday, we wrap up on a Friday, But actually getting them to understand that the way they interact, the way they challenge each other, the way they offer their opinions, the way they dissect one another's opinions, the way they get to a decision, the way they commit to that decision, the way they hold each other accountable to their part of that decision and their behaviours, that is what I kind of call collaboration. That often isn't appreciated in the teams that we work with initially, because ultimately the ability the team has to do all those things will determine the output of that team. And you're quite right. There's obviously outside factors at play, external factors, external stakeholders, which will have an impact on the output. But I guess in the circle of control, our way of working, our way of dealing with all those external actors, that's critical which will deliver our results.
And we talked about this at the start of the call, thinking about all the different sectors and industries that you've worked across. Do you find that there's much kind of communality and frequency around some of those behaviours that go on in those kind of teams? What sort of golden threads have you spotted in your time working with those kind of groups? Oh, sorry, not groups, teams.
So yes is the short answer. There's I would say 70-80% of what we do with teams is the same stuff, because that's the same challenge that they're having. So trust is obviously always one that's raised. Low trust environments are slow. People are second guessing, people are checking, people are doing the work of levels below them because they don't trust it's being done. So, slow environments in the business space are costly environments, right? Not just costly through financially, but costly through relationships and fulfillment and engagement. So trust is one that always raises its head, and we can speak for the rest of the pod on trust if you like, but I'll skip past and we can come back if you're interested. Trust is a big one. The second, certainly with senior teams, is being indivisible as a senior team. So what I mean by that is, in the room, when it's time to get to a decision, let's, get the gloves off or on, and let's really robustly challenge each other to really get to the truth. And this is where having that kind of strong social identity and a strong mission or strong objective is critical, because the focus is us, the team, and delivering the mission. It's not on me, Dom, you going with my plan because it was my plan. So having that clarity around what we're doing and why we're doing it, and the trust enables us to have those kind of tough, difficult conversations and dissect the opinions that are brought to the table robustly before then deciding on a course of action. And when a decision is reached, then we 100% commit to delivering it. And there's a few big differences I've noticed through my time in the military and then time in the business space, is that on military operations, there's a lot of argument and discussion around how we should conduct a certain mission. But when a decision is made, then everyone is lockstep behind it, because they know that if 1 out of the 100 people decides to do it differently, then it's probably not going to succeed and the risk to life is increased. So at one point in time, it's time to jump in line and we fully commit and execute together. So disagree and commit is a phrase I've heard used as well. And that's really critical, because when we leave that room, having had that senior leader team meeting, we're being watched 24/7. Every leader is. And so if the teams below you or through the organisation can hint just the slightest bit of daylight behind that between that senior team, that's when we start getting fractures appearing. And we always talk about it in the Marines. It's okay to drip up, by all means. Drip up every day, but never drip down. Never let people see your team as divisible. And that's something I think some teams that we work with struggle with, because there's a real sense of they feel a strong sense of belonging or loyalty to their down and in functional team, which is understandable. That's where they've grown up. But their primary loyalty ought to be to their horizontal up and out, because that's really their role now, is to deliver higher intent. It's not to just focus on the down and in.
That's so interesting, because I think whilst a lot of the PCS community are actually, interestingly, ex-military, people who are outside of that space might not instinctively guess that kind of behaviour is encouraged, that kind of, arguing about the strategy and the tactics around what should happen, and then finding that tipping point where you commit to the course of action. I think because most often not, the phrase command and control is most closely associated with a particular style of leadership, which is very stereotypically applied to the military. In other words, the person who's highest chain of command gets to choose what's happening, and that is what everyone agrees to do. So it is different then?
It's very different, yeah, and you're right, Mark. You're not the first person to, and this is frankly with our brand, while we don't really lead with the military analogy, because I think it's misplaced in the sense that people have a huge respect for the military in the UK. But I think they do have these impressions that, it's very command and control. It's very kind of jump to attention, do what I say. And don't get me wrong, all the movies and TV series don't help. And the rank structure in a peacetime army under poor leadership will allow for that type of leadership to spread. So I can't speak for the wider military. I can speak for the Royal Marines with confidence. And certainly in frontline infantry units, when the battle space is changing at a rapid rate, there is a military leadership philosophy called mission command, which it sounds, again, very command and control, doesn't it? But in its essence, what does it do? If you think of a frontline military operation, you have thousands of moving parts, people, vehicles, fires, so assets that can fire missiles or rockets. You've got helicopters flying around, you've got fast jets. It's very complex, moving at a rapid rate, very confusing. And it's obviously engaging with an adversary who is also has a fair amount of complexity with how they're moving their assets around. So the question is, how do you get all of those parts to orchestrate to have a very specific effect, a joint effect, because you want them all to have a joint effect at a specific point, geographical point, at a specific time, and yet provide all of those assets with enough flexibility and adaptability that as the enemy does something different, they're able to respond in the moment and make good decisions, but also remain adaptable such that a few hours later, they can have another joint effect at another different space at a different time. And Mission Command enables us to do that. So Mission Command is a way in which you can very quickly cascade your intent from commander to commander to commander all the way down to the front line. And it's basically very simple. This is the effect I want you to achieve. This is the effect I want you to achieve. This is why you're doing it. So you connect your mission to the level above. It's down to you now to go and figure out specifically what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. So that ownership and accountability is pushed right down. Now, the effect of that is a few things. Firstly, if I've received that intent, it's now down to me to figure out what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it. I'm going to really learn what we call the situation. What's going on? What's the enemy doing? What's the ground doing? What assets do I have? Where are my friendly forces? Where are my neighbouring forces? So I really get to understand my environment. So I take full ownership and accountability. I'm then also trying to figure out with my team, okay, what are we going to do? And by owning that problem, it means that when things change, I can make good and effective decisions that are safe to both the assets around me, but also going to be in line with my boss's plan and my boss's plan. So we talk about thinking 2 levels up. And at every level, we brief our team what the 2 levels up are. And again, that's so everyone has a really good situational awareness of not just what this means to my team of 8, but what this means to my team of 8 and what it means to the team of 30 and the team of 100 that I'm a part of. So that mission command is absolutely practiced by frontline units, because the stereotypical, standard attention, ask for orders. If I'm a young soldier or a young Marine on the front line and I'm having to make a quick decision because I've seen something, if I turn around and say, what should I do now? It's way too late to either face the threat or exploit the opportunity, because there's also lots of opportunities evolving all the time. So you'll see that style of leadership is a lot more prevalent than the movies will let you think.
That's so interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it makes me think about kind of the classic myth with kind of great chess players is that people who are really good at chess, your grandmasters, those types, are ones who will think maybe 2, maybe 3, 4 moves ahead of where the game is currently being played. And to an extent that's true, but what is really true in terms of the separating the great from the good is that the great players make every move count in a way that each move opens up the maximum possibilities of future moves.
Well, wow, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
So that sounds really similar to what you're describing in terms of thinking 2 levels up, but also, exploiting opportunities and addressing threats. Each move should allow for maximizing all of those things. On a chessboard. And I guess if everyone is aware of what the intention is, then it makes decision making much more fluid.
Yes.
And much more owned.
Absolutely, because people own their level and they're accountable for their level, and we also, give people very clear sort of constraints and boundaries, so people understand, the limits, what the decisions they can make. So their boundaries or the boundaries or constraints that they operate under are very clear to them as well.
Yeah, one of the things I was really interested to find on your website was that you, amongst other things, you run the kind of outward bound adventure style experiences with some of these teams.
Yeah.
Can you just talk a bit about those and how those tend to play out and what sort of results that you find taking those kind of really senior teams away into the wilderness? Yeah.
So kind of 4 years into the business now, and I've probably done 5 of them or so. So we're still kind of evolving it and developing it as a product, but it's the last iteration we did was in March, and I think we're getting pretty close to it. Why do we do it? The first kind of engagement with the senior team. So our main product is an 18-month partnership, and our first engagement with the team will be 2 3-day workshops. The first of which we really dive into team behaviours, ways of working, leadership, and to kind of go into a workshop cold and start talking about that sort of stuff is quite difficult. Even with a team that's kind of that rapport is there, it's not with us, with the facilitators, despite kind of pre-work we do. So that can be improved by this outdoor experience. We basically take a team away. We don't tell them what we're doing. It's kind of we call it in the military training dislocation of expectation. So it's getting them used to kind of dealing with things as they appear, which itself can have some interesting kind of learnings. And we go somewhere like Dartmoor or Brecon Beacons or the Highlands, kind of close to where they are. And the serial lasts for 24 hours. And it's a kind of hypothetical serial scenario where they've got to kind of thwart some big terrorist attack or something like that. And they have to work as a team to do this. And they're given very clear intent. So their 1 level up gives them their intent, and their 2 levels up gives them their intent. And they've got their part of the plan that they have to go in and act. And so the first part of it is them really trying to distill that and understand it and share information, because they all get given just a written pack. So that first bit is really interesting, how people digest and share information, or where assumptions made. And everything we do, Mark, it's probably worth saying, is everything's bridged back to the business, because it's about the senior team getting better at delivering their work. So a lot of this is around, what can we learn from this? So the sharing of information is interesting first one. Then they come up with their plan, and then boom, the phone goes off, or someone bursts in, and the situation changes and evolves from there. And depending on the physicality and appetite of the team, we can ramp up the kind of excitement of it for those teams who aren't able or keen for that. Then it's more of a kind of hotel basis and walking maybe, or something outdoors, just get some fresh air and exposure to a different environment. We find it helpful for a few things. Firstly, we just dislocate that team from their normal work environment is useful to kind of get their head into the space of being in one team now, focused on the business and how we're going to work together. Helps to kind of remove any hierarchies. Unless you've got someone who's ex-military, they're probably going to be slightly out of their comfort zone, and that's something we manage very carefully. For us, the main effort at all times is the team to come through this as one body. So if there's ever a hint of one person kind of, it's bitten too much, then we dial it back. So, but at the same time, we do try and play on the comfort zone a little bit, because we know what a transformative experience it can be if people do feel they've been stretched a little bit and come out. And that kind of shared hardship is a really nice forging bond. We talked about earlier about social identity, but this idea of kind of getting through something together and pulling each other through and can help really forge that. And, we touched on trust earlier. Trust for us is made up of ability, benevolence, and integrity. We trust people who are competent at what we're asking them to do, behave in a certain way that are aligned to our values, and are benevolent towards us, i.e. have our interests at heart and are kind to us. And so events like this, where we can put them through an experience to help them develop that benevolence specifically, enables them. And, when they've seen each other a little bit vulnerable, trust ultimately is exposure to risk, right? It's being vulnerable. If I trust someone to do something, I'm exposing myself to the vulnerability. So the more people get comfortable being in that space, the stronger those trust forms are going to be. And therefore, the more honest people will be in conversation, because they don't feel there's going to be ulterior motive or agenda with comments that people are making. So we find it useful for the trust element as well. And then just a general behaviors that link back to the business, because the scenario is changing rapidly all the time. New information is coming up. How the team sharing that information, understanding the information, figuring out what to do, making a decision, committing to it. How do they then decide, are they going to get there by vehicle, by foot? Who they're going to send where? And the scenario itself is kind of set up to explain mission command. The kind of leadership philosophy I mentioned a second ago, we call it leading with intent in the civilian space. But it helps them understand that, because ultimately at the end of 24 hours, the situation has changed a huge amount, but at no point in those 24 hours were they given any further direction. And the kind of aha moment from that is, if you're really clear to the team about the direction you're going in, where risk lies, where opportunity lies, and you push that ownership and accountability down your team, well, they're actually in the best place to make the decision, because that's where the information's coming into the business. So we talk a lot about, put the decision where the information is. Let's not put the decision too much higher than the information. That's a long waffly answer to your succinct question.
No, it's not at all. It's fascinating to hear that, and thank you for sharing so much about your approach. I was really taken by what you said about trust there. So you said ability, benevolence, and integrity, right?
Correct.
I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago where there was a Belgian chap there talking about his approach to mapping out networks in organizations in a really kind of cool techie way, and seeing how people genuinely connect to each other, not using a organizational chart, but actually how does it work? And he found some really interesting stuff around how people seek out support in an organization. I think his language was compassion and competence. So if you think of those as kind of qualities that would naturally cause somebody to ask for help.
Yeah.
Obviously, you wouldn't necessarily want to go and find someone who is neither compassionate nor competent to help them to solve a problem, which is exactly what he found. And in an ideal world, they would often go and find someone who is both compassionate and confident. And competent, sorry.
Yeah.
But they tended to be at a more senior level within the team or the organisation, so often they just weren't available.
Interesting. Yeah.
So then you've got the case of, well, what do you go for? Is it more likely that people would go for people who were competent enough to solve the problem, or people who were compassionate to understand their concerns and hear them?
Yeah.
What would you guess?
I'd go for compassionate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a massive, significant way, that's exactly what he found.
Yeah.
Is that people, when they are looking for support in most organisations and most teams, they will seek out people who see them and hear them, and they feel present to them genuine compassion.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I've not heard those two. A lot of the trust research splits out into two: character and competence, which is, I guess, is similar to compassion, a sense of character. The reason I like this model, and it's by Meyer, Davis and Shorman. It's from 1995, right? So it's 30 years now, but it's a great bit of work. It's because those are the three data points from which we assess someone as trustworthy or not. But whether we trust them, i.e. we enter into, they call it risk-taking in relationships. So let me paint this a bit better, right? So if I'm going to trust you to do something, there's a few things that mean that determine whether I trust you or not. The first is my propensity to trust. And that's set across anyone. And depending on my background, my culture, my experiences will determine whether I have a high or low propensity to trust. I'm then assessing your ability, integrity and benevolence. And those data points will come from my experience with you, your reputation, your CV, perhaps. That then, with my propensity to trust and what I deem as your kind of ability, integrity, benevolence, that will determine a level of trust I have in you. When there's something that I need to trust you, I will subconsciously decide, does the level of risk outweigh the amount I trust Mark? If it does, I won't enter into what they call it risk-taking in relationships. So I actually won't enter any risk, because at that point, although I have a level of trust for you, I'm not at risk, I'm not vulnerable. I only become vulnerable at the point at which, let's say, the assessed risk of the task is smaller than the amount I trust you. Well, then I'll say, Mark, yeah, go ahead and do it. At that point, I am vulnerable, I'm at risk. The interesting thing is determining on your outcome and the behaviours you exhibit and the kind of results from what you do in completing that task. Again, all subconscious. I then update my perception of your ability, integrity, benevolence. And so the interesting thing for me reading this is that when we're in a team or business, we have a trusting relationship with everyone who we work with a lot. And we are, almost through every interaction with that person, either improving our trust in them or I'm decreasing my trust in them. And it's all incremental, and it's all through kind of exposure, observations. So I thought it was a really interesting bit of research.
And I guess what's really helpful is that there's a series of tools, PCS is one of them, that allow you a window into that ongoing kind of poll and data collection that's going on within a team, where you can see what is this likely to be on any given day, and how is that likely to fluctuate when changes appear, when there's a change in leadership, when there's a change in the dynamics and structure of the team, when there's a change in some of the external factors that shape that team. It's rare that you get a little window into seeing what's going on in terms of those changes.
And that's why, I mean, as you well know, I use PCS. I think it's such a great tool because, we kick off our workshops with a lot of pre-interviews. We spend a lot of time in the business trying to gauge, what's going on and getting perceptions. But having that other data capture through the PCS, using that along with our pre-interview notes and some workshop sessions, combination of all those things really opens the doors to those interesting conversations and discussions. We really rate it as a tool for delivering or showing us that as another aid in our toolbox.
How do you tend to position it with your clients then? If they don't know that they need this, but they're going to get this, report with lots of data and insights in it, how do you tend to share that with them when you're in that kind of contracting stage?
Yeah, so I just sell it as part of our package. I don't really give them the option.
Right. Yeah.
So that's just kind of part of our diagnostic phase, I explain. And I kind of, not that I do, but I'm always ready to kind of share a sample report. And in the way I kind of deliver it, I'll always have a one-on-one with the leader after the report, so they don't feel caught out, or it's not happened yet, but if there was anything in there, that I just kind of want to give them first dibs, so they're kind of aware. And then I kind of I go through the results with the team in a workshop setting, as part of kind of the early stage of our workshop, in terms of, we always do a lot of work around, where are we now? What we're doing really well, and where are opportunities to improve. And it comes part of that discussion and those breakouts.
Thanks, Dom. You made me think about something else when you were talking about intent and your concept of sort of thinking 2 levels up.
Yeah.
I can absolutely see how this would work in most teams. And also I can see some certain circumstances and certain organizations when potentially things like team climate might be a bit wobbly, and there might be kind of people playing games, using lots of kind of political moves, for example, and potentially those two intentions might not line up, and they might not allow someone to interpret them in the right way. How does that tend to get resolved in those kind of those conversations? I'm thinking about, for example, an organization when you have a very senior team member, sort of C-suite board level, who's setting an intention, but they are so far removed from the next layer down, maybe geographically as well as kind of psychologically, emotionally, that the next layer down, their intention is possibly at odds with what the other person's wanting to achieve. How would you approach something like that?
Yeah, it's interesting. So in a classical hierarchy, it's got to go top down, because otherwise you're going to have this disconnect. We use in the civilian space, what the businesses we use OKRs to kind of help that cascade of intention. The mission, calling it an intent is kind of military lexicon, or missions and intents. They're slightly different, but that's kind of the thing. And then in the civilian sort of commercial space, we use OKRs to help deliver that. So there has to be real clarity on, what's my objective, what am I moving from and to, and the why is really to deliver the level above, and helping teams cascade that down. Now, it's just good practice, good leadership, really. When I get given my objective, well, then I'm pulling my team in and I'm saying, right, how are we going to deliver this? That's how we get that kind of vertical alignment. And then that horizontal alignment between my team is identifying where the gaps are, where the collaboration opportunities are. Are we missing anything? Are we got unnecessary overlaps? So that horizontal alignment is almost as important as that vertical alignment. But we don't want everything trickling top down, because, you want people to be engaged and motivated. So, that there's a balance there of, bottom up in a certain sense. I'm setting my own objectives. I've got my overall direction. You want autonomy to a certain extent, while also a little bit of top down, so you're aligned to the higher level. Does that answer what you're thinking?
Yeah, it does. I've thought of a real example of an organisation I used to work really closely with out in Norway, where they were controlled by a US company. And the US company was very much around kind of like talent solutions and selling these kind of big global talent solutions out. But this very specific little office in Norway had happened upon a particular product and a range of services around it that was astronomically profitable for that little pocket. Whilst the central message was, we're a talent company. Locally, the message was, we need to be selling more of this because it's making so much money that we can't not continue to do it. Even if sometimes that is at odds with the wider company who are telling us that we're a talent company. So there was always this, you're right, it was a disconnect, because there was this little satellite business that was almost kind of adrift from the rest of the organization, because the intentions and the mission was just ever so slightly off. And it went on for years and years before it kind of was reined back in.
Yeah, I guess if it's clear what people are doing and what people are supporting in the lines, then there's nothing wrong with that. I think where I've seen it go awry a little bit is where there's a team in the middle of that disconnect and they don't know, are we working to support the US vision, or am I here to support the Norwegian team delivering? because if that team don't know what they're doing, then you've got huge friction and unnecessary people doing work. They don't know what team they're supporting or and you're creating frictions and unnecessary work. And I've seen that in a couple of businesses where there is this kind of senior leader level strategy, and supposed autonomy down at the bottom level. But then the middle level are caught in this. Well, which team are we supporting?
Yeah, a big challenge for all involved there.
Yeah, and I don't think there's not a right or wrong model on the example you gave. I think both could work, but the question you've got to ask, do your team just know what the model is? Because if you've got people, it's unnecessary headcount for one, let alone a lack of fulfillment engagement from that entire workforce. They just don't know what they're supporting.
Yeah. Now, I know we're not supposed to have kind of favourites when it comes to tools and models, but I know you're particularly well versed in a number of those. So, aside from PCS, which goes without saying, of course, do you have any favourites that you like to draw upon when you're working with these kind of teams that we've been talking about today? What sort of other models, tools, research frameworks do you find yourself going to help them unravel and unpick some of these issues?
I guess we use a lot, right? So, and they all have kind of varied uses. I guess the couple that we use quite a lot. So Gordon Curfey's Rocket model is a high performing teams model. Lencioni's got 5 dysfunctions. The reason we use five dysfunctions bit is it's very well known, and a lot of teams have kind of touched on it before. So at least you're using a frame of reference they understand. I wouldn't agree necessarily with everything in there. But I definitely, when I first came across it after the military, it really resonated with my experience. So I think it is a powerful model. So we use that, we layer our own stuff into it. So for example, when Lencioni talks about trust, he talks about, let's be really vulnerable with each other. And again, it's quite difficult to say, right, guys, let's just be vulnerable. Or if you suddenly learn about my childhood in 10 minutes, we're going to have really high trust. And I think the reason for that is, back to ability, integrity, benevolence. Maybe someone's ability can be determined immediately. You get on a plane because you trust the pilot's going to be a good pilot, right? Integrity can be arguably interpreted quite quickly if the culture in an organisation is really strong. But benevolence takes time, right? It takes time for people to think, does this person really care about me? Can I really open up with this person? So that for me is one example of a kind of weakness with Lencioni's kind of view on trust. But it's a nice simple model, and so we do layer our stuff onto it, and then people might say it's super old and super out of date, but I really think Adair's action-centered leadership is powerful, because ultimately, if we're focused on achieving the mission, we're focused on delivering the task, we're focused on delivering results, if we focus on building the right team, building the environment, building the ways of working, plugging them effectively into the rest of the organisation, and then just get out of their way and focus on removing their obstacles. And we're also focused on developing, coaching the individual. That's a really powerful kind of 3-way. The reason why we like using it is, we put that up on a graphic and we say, as leaders, we need to kind of stand above this and identify where we place our time. Where do you spend most of your time? And everyone says, I'm in the task. I'm stuck in the task. Why are you stuck in the task? Lack of trust, lack of resources, lack of, what's the effect of you being stuck in the task? Certainly at the senior leadership level, what's the effect of you being in sales, ops, marketing, stuck in the weeds? Well, you're not working as one team looking on the up and out. You're not looking at the future strategy. You're not identifying where we can collaborate, where opportunities are. So for me, all those models, they're great, and they for me, they just kind of paint the picture and open up the discussions and the kind of aha moments with the teams that then get them thinking, right, we need to do things a little bit differently. What we're going to change going forward. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I think John Adair's work has definitely stood the test of time. I think some of the best models have it. I think we have a bit of a, unfortunately, in this industry, we have a tendency to gravitate towards the shiny and new stuff just because it's shiny and new, whereas there's so much value still to be mined from some of those really established models, especially when so much has changed in the workplace now. Actually, it can be helpful just to go back and have a fresh look at it and go, well, how else is this relevant right now when we've got teams who are facing these huge existential crises, such as, what even is a team these days? What is work? What is an office?
Yeah.
And some of these really established, grounded models that have got years worth of kind of validation behind them can be really helpful just to kind of anchor a team back to understanding the answers to some of those questions.
Yeah. No, I fully agree.
Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today, Dom. If people want to find out a bit more about you and what you do, where's the best place to contact you?
Yeah, cool. So the business is called Albany Peak. So it's albanypeak.com. But I'm on LinkedIn as well. So Dom Weldon on LinkedIn. There's only a couple of us. So that's probably the best way to get hold of me.
Super duper. I'll make sure I leave links to all those models and also to your website and LinkedIn in the show notes when this goes out. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks for your time, Mark. Cheers.
If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know by subscribing and leaving a review on your favourite podcast app. Meanwhile, if you're interested to learn more about how the PCS approach can help you explore leadership, performance and culture within your business, get in touch with our team and we'll be happy to help.